Welcome to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast, where we talk with the nation's top experts about today's toughest parenting challenges. Whether you're concerned about your child's development, learning, behavior, or you just want to make family time more enjoyable, we share the practical solutions and tools that can help.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Exceptional Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Stefanie Boucher, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that is probably at least a little bit frustrating to most parents. I know it definitely is to me. We're going to talk about the sharp decrease in the amount of time that today's children spend playing outside as compared to generations of the past. If you grew up before the 1990s, you probably experienced a childhood that was much different than the one your children are currently experiencing. And you probably spent quite a bit of your free time playing outside in an unstructured and carefree way. For example, you might have had 2 or 3 recess sessions at school during the day, or perhaps just one really long one of an hour or so. Then you likely came home from school, had a snack, did a little bit of homework, probably not more than an hour, at least in elementary school, and then you may have run outside to play with your friends until it got dark outside. And that's it. You probably weren't driving around all over the county for organized sports or all sorts of other adult supervised activities like your own child might be doing. But of course, times have changed. People are more concerned now about the safety of our children, both in terms of possible injuries and the risk of child predators. There are also more expectations around schoolwork, with kids learning more advanced materials at younger and younger ages. And of course, there is the wonderful but insidious presence of electronic devices, which tend to distract our children endlessly while also keeping them indoors. The question is, how has this cultural shift from having childhoods that are spent primarily outdoors to ones that are spent primarily indoors affected the well-being and development of our children? Because these are the first children in history to really grow up this way. I am here today with Angela Hanscom. Angela is a pediatric occupational therapist who has spent years researching and analyzing trends around child development. She's the founder of Timbernook, an outdoor learning program and immersive nature experience for kids. And she's also the author of Balanced and Barefoot: How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so excited to have you here today. I've really been looking forward to having this conversation with you, as I mentioned before we got started. This is something that we've been talking about a lot in my own home lately. My husband, incidentally, also has a background in occupational therapy. And we know a lot of kids, whether they're ours or our children's friends or kids of our friends. And sometimes it just seems like many of the children today just don't even know what to do when they get outside. It's like they're bored outdoors, which of course is the exact opposite of when we were kids and we couldn't wait to go out and get out of the house because outside was fun and inside was boring. How do you think kids of today are different than the children of, say, 30 years ago? What trends and challenges are we seeing in this population?
That's a great question. There's certain trends that we're seeing in general, both as therapists, and also we interviewed teachers that had been around for at least 30 years to see if they were seeing a rise in sensory issues like we were seeing in the clinic settings. And one of the number one issues is actually a decrease in attention. For instance, a teacher said in the past, she was able to teach the whole classroom as a whole in the early 80s, and maybe 1 or 2 kids had trouble paying attention. She said now on a good day, at least 8 out of those 26 kids are having trouble, and that she actually had to change the way she teaches. So breaking them up into small groups and engaging them in the task versus teaching as a whole class. So that's the number one issue. Another issue is that their posture is actually changing. So chiropractors and physical therapists are seeing this forward posture, and they're treating back pain at an earlier age for children, which actually will make sense a little bit, but a lot of it has to do with a decreased core strength, like stomach muscles and back muscles aren't as strong as they used to be, but they're also carrying around these really heavy backpacks, and then they're looking at screens. So a lot of times their head is in this forward position. Another issue is that kids are falling, which is not one that I believed until I saw it myself, but kids are literally falling out of their chairs in school. And I was visiting a classroom one day and a kid fell on the floor, and the teacher said, "That's the third time today, get back in your seat." A director of a local preschool for over 40 years says, "I don't remember this being an issue in the past, but kids are literally running into each other and running into the walls."
Wow.
But this was not something that was very common. So spatial awareness is not quite where it should be. And then another issue is the decrease in imaginative play. So teachers that monitor recess are saying that they saw much more imaginatory type play years past, about 30, 40 years ago. And they're seeing more playing games like tag or playing on a play structure now, less imaginatory play. And then the other thing that it was really alarming is that kids are getting more aggressive. And it's not bullying per se, but they almost can't keep their hands off each other. So when they go to play a game like tag, they're hitting with much more force. And not necessarily meaning to hurt other kids, but they're actually starting to ban tag at some schools because kids are getting more physical.
I was just going to say that my kids are not allowed to play tag at school. They can play something called shadow tag, which means you're allowed to like tag the shadow of a child, but not touch the child.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that has, they're really, what's going on is they're having trouble regulating how much force to use. So their senses are off.
That's really interesting. So why is this happening?
So, this is a great question. It's really neuroscience, and a lot of it has to do with they're not getting enough movement and they're not getting enough outdoor play. And so let me explain that a little more in depth. What's happening is the research is stating that in America, kids are sitting for about 9 hours on average a day. And so they're often restricted, their movement, and children are designed to move, and they really should be playing outdoors at least 3 hours a day. But basically, kids are in this upright position a lot. So they're not doing spinning in circles, going upside down, and moving in rapid ways that is actually needed in order to move the fluid back and forth in their inner ear. And what that does is it develops your vestibular system. And that sense is key to all the other senses. So if that is underdeveloped, if kids are not moving enough, that sense won't be strong enough to support the other senses. And it helps specifically with knowing where your body is in space. So it helps you to get from point A to point B safely, stay in your seat without falling out. It helps you to go on and off playground equipment without falling off or getting hurt. But what's happening is when kids spin or they're moving their body in different directions, what we're doing as adults is we're often saying, don't do that. Like get down from that rock, you're going to get hurt.
Yes.
Don't spin, you're going to get dizzy.
Yes, we hear that all the time.
Yeah. So as adults, we're actually becoming the barrier to child development because a child's neurological system is designed to seek out the sensory input it needs at any given time. And it's helping to organize the brain and organize the senses. And so when we keep them from doing those movements, we're kind of a barrier in that aspect. The other thing that's going on is that vestibular system helps with attention. And that's why often you'll see kids fidgeting is what the vestibular system does is it turns the reticular activating system on in the brain to pay attention. And so that's why you see kids moving back and forth in their chair. They're moving their vestibular system to ignite the brain to pay attention. And what do adults say sometimes is, sit still, right?
Yeah.
So, but those children often need to move not just in that moment, but really throughout the day in order to have and acquire the skill of attention.
That is so fascinating to me. And it makes me think, so about 1 in 10 kids right now is diagnosed with ADHD or learning and attention issues of some kind. And countless others are being diagnosed with sensory processing disorders or mental health disorders like anxiety or depression. What is the likelihood, do you think, that a lack of movement or a lack of active free play is contributing to the rise of these diagnoses?
Yeah, I think it's a huge indicator. See, the thing is, a percentage of these issues are hereditary, but the problem is we're seeing a huge rise in the amount of sensory issues and attention issues we're getting. And that should tell you that we need to look at the environment because there's a good percentage that is also development is impacted by the environment for children. And so if you think about how much time you had for free play as a kid growing up, what I hear over and over when I do speaking engagements is it's 4 to 6 hours was average on what adults spent playing outdoors for free play. And children today, the research is saying 48 minutes. And so that's a significant decrease in the amount of moving different directions, digging in the dirt for hours, stimulating the muscles, engaging the senses, to a lot of kids being on technology for hours at a time, which is replacing outdoor play.
Yeah. And so that's a good point about things being largely hereditary, which I think is likely true. And the science, it shows that it is true. However, I think that, like you said, it's the heredity combined with the environment. So, for example, if you have a child with ADHD, it's possible that some of the parents or grandparents may have had a similar diagnosis if they had grown up in the same environment that their child is growing in. Is that is that how you would classify it?
Right. It's it's actually a huge red flag if most children are walking around with an underdeveloped balance sense. And most children when we did a pilot study, we found only 1 out of every 12 children could meet the core strength standards and the balance sense from 1984. So only 1 out of 12 children. And we're actually, some of our occupational therapy assessments, we've changed the norms because kids aren't meeting them.
Wow.
So the standards for kids are getting weaker. So it's a huge problem. And that, to me, there's something wrong with the environment because not that many children should have issues with this.
Yeah, exactly. So what do we need to do then culturally to get things moving in the right direction for kids again?
Well, we do need to take a hard look at their environment and think about how much time they have for outdoor play. There's so much rich things happening when kids play out in nature. Movement alone is important, but there's so much more, like just, for instance, stepping outdoors and hearing bird sounds that actually help with spatial awareness, because a bird will tweet in one direction, a bird will tweet behind you, and then a bird will tweet in a distance. And what you're doing, a child is orienting themselves to the bird sounds around them. And that's the basis for spatial awareness. So all sorts of things, being out in nature actually helps to integrate and organize the senses as well.
Wow. So are all types of movement created equal then, or are there specific types of movements that children may need more of than what they're probably getting? I know you mentioned things like spinning and hanging upside down. Are those the main ones, or are there?
Children should actually move in ways that make adults gasp.
Yeah.
They really need to. They do. They need to spin in circles on the swings. They need to go on their bellies. Ironically, what's really interesting is the healthcare world is actually doing the opposite sometimes of what the educational world is doing. So in therapy, we will have a child sit on a swing and we'll position them in all different directions and spin them and stimulate the hair cells in different ways. And that helps them become safer in their environments. They'll have better safety awareness. When I worked with children privately, I would ask them to spin on their swings at school. And often they would come back and say, it's too dangerous. They won't let me.
Yeah.
The rhesus monitors are saying it's true. They can't even go on their bellies on the swings. They have to remain upright. So they're doing the opposite. And so they're trying to keep kids safe by restricting them, but it's actually having the opposite effect. Kids are becoming more and more unsafe.
Let's talk about this notion of safety for a minute, because I think about the things I used to do as a child, and I know my parents and grandparents saw me doing these things, but they're just not things that you really see kids doing anymore. And I think exactly what you said, they were things that would make an adult gasp. I mean, I remember being on uneven bars on a playground and just, kind of going over with, hanging on with one leg and spinning up, upside down, like as many times as I could to see if I could break, my own personal record. Could I get to 100 spins? Could I get to, that type of thing? And all of the really sort of scary sorts of things that kids do. And I did these things at school. I can't even imagine anyone at my child's school, letting anybody do that anymore. they have taken away pretty much everything that is fun. I was having a conversation with my daughters about 2 years ago, and they were talking about how they couldn't play tag anymore. Then, jump rope became a thing for a little while, but then somebody decided that the jump ropes weren't safe, so no one was allowed to bring jump ropes anymore. Then cartwheels became a thing for a while, and suddenly they weren't allowed to even do cartwheels anymore. And it was just sort of one thing after another. And so I asked, I said, so what is it that you guys actually do when you go outside? And they said, well, sometimes we just stand on the blacktop and talk and walk around a little bit because there's not much more we can do. And that just floored me. And it made me so sad because that's just not what recess should be, or at least it's not what it was before for me.
Right. I guess the whole notion of taking things away because we're trying to keep them safe is actually it's backfiring, and it's not really the way to address the underlying issue at all. It's a Band-Aid approach, and it's not solving the issue. A great example of that is tag. So we mentioned that a couple times, and what's happening there is they're really not getting enough what we call proprioceptive input. So they're not getting enough heavy work. They're not digging in the dirt for hours. They're not climbing trees where you're getting input to the joints and muscles as they should. And that helps to develop the sense of knowing how much force to use when playing games like tag, or holding a baby chick without squeezing too hard, or riding without breaking the lead over and over. And it's also helps you know where your limbs are in space. But children need to, hours of outdoor play to develop that. And playing on iPads where you're just pushing buttons, you're not getting heavy work. So that sense is also pretty underdeveloped in a lot of children. And so what we see is aggression, and we'll take things away, not really understanding that, kids, they need more outdoor play. They don't need things taken away.
Yeah. And the other thing too is taking recess away as a punishment. I hear about that a lot too. Like the kids were misbehaving, or there were some kids that were noisy, and so their recess got cut in half, those are the kids that probably need recess the most. So I think that's another kind of counterproductive action to take. So we hear from our health experts a lot, and many pediatricians say that we should strive to get our kids to play outside for an hour a day. And you mentioned that, maybe back in the 1980s, kids were playing outside 4 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
What is the ideal? Maybe 4 to 6 hours a day isn't always possible given today's busy lifestyles. What is, in your opinion, the right amount of time that we should be striving for? Or really, should we just be aiming for the 4 to 6 hours come what may?
Yeah, well, I think the number that keeps coming up is at least 3 hours, and that's more active play. It doesn't have to necessarily be outdoors. Mm-hmm. Although when you step outdoors, you get a richer experience, and it's really conducive to sensory integration out there. So, but much more than we think. I think 45 minutes to an hour is not enough for kids. There's so much learning, exploration, movement. It's the ideal environment for kids to learn too. That takes effort and time, and I think that's a hard jump sometimes for people, but it's really important, and it's a huge need for kids to be moving. An hour a day is not enough movement for kids.
Yeah. I loved what you said before about the birds and how the chirping of birds can help develop a child's sense of spatial awareness. I had never heard that before. That's so interesting. And it makes me wonder, what other physiological benefits might our kids be losing when they aren't connecting to the natural world? And, are there mental health benefits as well? What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's so many. It's really like we're just peeling an onion right now. But to give you a couple different ones. One is when you step outdoors and you compare that to where you're sitting right now. Let's say you're in an office, right away, there's multiple senses engaged, right? So you have the wind, and you have the sun, you have the birds chirping, the ground is uneven. So inside when you're walking, you don't even have to think about it. It's not challenging. But as soon as you step outdoors, you're challenging the balance in the senses. It's like a baby crawling indoors, and you take them outdoors and they start crawling outside. The uneven terrain is challenging the muscles differently every step they take. And so you're getting almost like cross training when you go outdoors. You're stimulating all of that. And you have multiple senses engaged, so more synapses are going to be firing in the brain, and your chances for sensory integration or organization is higher. That sensory integration needs to happen for kids to learn and to pay attention and to be able to focus. I think we jump to, in school, we want them to do all these higher level skills, and they're not even there yet. These kids are coming unprepared to school more than ever before. So sensory integration. The other thing is you have to be in a calm, alert state for sensory integration to happen. And if you think of outdoors, you think of the colors, right? You have greens, blues, browns, it's very calming colors. You go for a massage, you'll have crashing waves. They have bird sounds, very calming stimuli. Even the smells of trees reduces cortisol levels in the brain. So it's very calming stimuli outside, but you're still alert because, again, you have uneven terrain. You might see an animal run by. So you're in this calm, alert state, and that is ideal for sensory integration. So we want to look at what percentage of time are kids in an environment ideal for sensory integration and organization of the brain, and what percentage of time are they in an environment that might be overstimulating or dysregulating, or it's not organizing. So their activity levels go up. They are much more easily frustrated. They're having trouble with regulating emotions. So thinking about noisy environments, or they're too close to a lot of children, which is very standard in the educational world, right? There's not a lot of space between children. All of that are things to think about.
That's really cool. As an occupational therapist, if you could design a classroom or a curriculum, what might a typical school day look like?
So I would take them outside.
Yeah.
Because you're speaking to me, but really I would take them outdoors, and because there's more space outside, and it's support sensory integration. But that space piece is also really important, because out in the woods and watching children in natural environments, they can get away from each other. The kids that often might be labeled with ADHD, you don't see those issues. They kind of dissipate out there. So that's really huge. And also they have a choice out there. They have time. They can regulate things more than inside. So ideally, I think we need to start thinking about doing more things outside with children than always thinking learning it takes place inside in a confined classroom.
Yeah. And I personally think that's true even in the wintertime. I think you live in the Northeast like I do. And, one thing I've noticed is that at my kids' school, they rarely have outdoor recess in the wintertime if it's below freezing. And that's another change that I feel like is different from prior generations, because it seemed to me that the weather could be bad when I was a kid and you'd still be pushed outside. So that's interesting too. As parents, many of us really want our schools to stop restricting play, or at least certain types of play, and have them get outside more and just be kids again. But sometimes it feels like running up against a brick wall. They're not always responsive to our pleas. Do you feel hopeful that our educational system will be able to make progress in this area? And is there anything that parents can do to help move the needle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is definitely hope. There's always hope. I think when you start losing hope, there you get in trouble. And there's a lot of research out there. All the research is pointing to the importance of more outdoor play and experiential learning and all this information. It's really about educating and opening the eyes to what's happening. And I have found that the most effective way is to, from the healthcare perspective, is I was always taught to do no harm. And we're at the point where we're harming kids. We focus a lot on nutrition and the importance of sleep, but what about enough movement and outdoor playtime? It's really a right for children, and we can't keep restricting them this way, because we're going to continue to see problems increase if we don't do something about it now. And what the work with Timbernook is, I kept hearing this cry from parents and teachers that they were very frustrated because they would take pieces of the information I was saying and they would get shut down. It was something that kept coming up, and we have decided, so we are in 5 countries with our program, and we're at very authentic sites. But last year, the door opened for us to go into schools and to bring our program into schools. And we have learned that teachers have to experience it firsthand to understand and to have ongoing support. It's not enough to preach or to say this needs to change. They really need a way. And so we're just really super excited about this. We will be bringing Timbernook and certifying schools to do our program year round. So authentic play experiences that really change the child.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. I'm curious, for parents of older children, I know a lot of parents who have middle schoolers, for example, can providing opportunities to be outdoors later in their development still help, even though a lot of their development has already taken place? I mean, can damage from lack of play be reversed or? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. On many levels, actually. So the first 7 years of life are critical, as most people know. So outdoor play, I mean, for organizing the senses, it's really a critical stage. However, we do, with treatment and occupational therapy and working on senses, you can create change in middle school or even adults. It just takes longer. It takes a little bit longer, and some of the behaviors become learned behaviors, so it's harder to break habits. But the other thing is creativity and independent play. Older children can learn to play as well. And it really takes practice and exposure over time. And so it just, but with the right environment and the right inspiration, we've seen huge changes in kids, even in middle school age.
Great. What are some things that most parents could start doing right now to facilitate their child's development at any age, whether they have a child in preschool or a child in middle school? What can parents do right now, particularly if they're getting a lot of pushback from kids who maybe don't want to go outside?
Sure. So I would think about creating figuring out what they're interested in, first of all. But for little kids, like toddlers, they want to be close to you. So often just creating an inspiring little space to play outdoors. For instance, in the summer, if you have like natural mud puddles, you might put out some stainless steel trays and different kitchenware near the mud puddles to see what they do with it. Or you might have trucks and planks for a child, or baby dolls and sponges, and you just use your environment, the natural spaces, and you might set out a couple materials for them to experiment with. And then what you do is you phase yourself out over time. So for toddlers, we try to reduce adult presence, our tendency to point every little thing out. But what we do when we're doing that, we're interrupting their play. And we want to inspire them to come up with their own play schemes. So setting up the environment and then kind of phasing yourself out is really the two key things. The other one is to invite friends over for the day. And children will often inspire each other to come up with different play ideas. The other thing to think about is when you first let your kid outside, they might see is sticks, rocks, and leaves, and they don't have any they don't have any ideas of what to do with that. And so they'll come in and say, I'm bored. But to remember that it's because they have it's called visual affordances, so they have no ideas on how to use those materials yet. And it might take them getting bored or being inspired by seeing other kids use those materials in different ways. So let's say they're sitting in the dirt for a while and they pick up a stick and they start digging with that stick. They'll realize, oh, okay, I have one visual affordance. This can be a tool, or it can be a writing utensil. And then maybe they see another child building with sticks and realize, oh, I can also use this to build. And the more exposure they get to materials used in different ways, the more creative they're going to get, the more affordances they will get. So creativity and being able to play independently does take exposure over time to other children in their environment.
So be patient is what you're saying.
Yeah. And provide the opportunity and don't give up, because I think we're quick to give up.
Absolutely. Well, Angela, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You've given us so much great stuff to think about. I know I, for one, am going to be incorporating a lot more outdoor play into the lives of my kids, into my own life, and into our family life as a whole. Angela, where can our listeners go if they want more information about you or want to learn more about this topic or Timbernook or your book?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the best place would be timbernook.com. Everything's on there. My story, how this all started. There's a TED Talk that I've done on there, and then information about the program. And so timbernook.com. And also we are very active on Facebook for Timbernook, and you can follow the latest research, and we'll often talk about the connections between outdoor play and development on there. So if they want a great resource, that would be another one to look for.
Fantastic. Thank you. To our listeners who have a Torchlight account, if you'd like some hands-on tools that are designed to help you bring some balance back into your child's life, I encourage you to log in and look for the tool called Daily Screen Time and Activity Log. It allows you to sort of assess how much of different types of activities your child is getting in a given day so that you can reorganize them in the way that best suits your family. Thank you so much. That's all for today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast. Find this and other episodes on iTunes, Spreaker, and Podcast Go. If you're interested in bringing Torchlight Child or any of Torchlight's other caregiving products to your workplace, please contact info@torchlight.care. That's info@torchlight.care.